as we heard, AI agents are moving from prototypes to production, which means we all need to talk about guardrails right now. At PAI, we convened researchers and practitioners from Microsoft, Stanford HAI, CDT, who we just heard from, and others to call for stronger safeguards for AI agents before these systems scale. And together, we released a policy research report last month titled Prioritizing Real-Time Failure Detection in AI Agents. Not at all a mouthful. But what we do in that report is that we argue that in addition to pre-deployment evaluations, which we are more familiar with in the, for the agents paradigm, we really need to be thinking about what safeguards kick in or operate during execution or operation of these agents. So over the next 8 minutes, I'll just give us a brief overview of the paper, and then we'll move on to the panel with our exciting speakers here who are wrestling with some of the same questions, but in industry, research, and policy. And before I get started, I want to flag 2 co-authors who are here in our presence. So that's Peter, who just walked in, perfect, and Rushika. So if you have any questions about the report, those are the people you find, not me. But I'm going to get us started. So there's a lot of talk about AI agents, and the term covers everything from chatbots to more autonomous action-taking systems. And what we heard from Miranda and Ruchika discussed how personalization through memory is changing AI systems. What we focus on with our paper is a complementary dimension, but really the ability to act directly in the environment, for systems to act directly in the environment. So if you look at this handy table, at levels 1 and 2, systems like ChatGPT provide suggestions, they retrieve information, but really humans have to remain in the loop for those suggestions to turn into action. So we really think the step change or the paradigm here happens at level 3 and above, when systems can start executing directly in digital environments, which have real-world consequences, with far less human involvement in the process. So the question is, why does this matter? So when AI systems move from advising to acting, new failure modes emerge, and we are starting to see that in studies getting published right now. And really, the same foundation models that could hallucinate before, you can imagine when it's the underlying technology for agents, agents that has booking access, it can hallucinate when it comes to the travel destination or the travel date. But the only difference is the system can go ahead and book the directs directly, book the tickets directly, which makes the harm far more immediate and concrete. But let's be honest, it's not just about scheduling. There are far more ambitious proposals for what these agents can do. There's talk of agents that can negotiate contracts on behalf of businesses, assist in healthcare decisions, and coordinate supply chains. So really, the failures compound here. They can result in financial loss, safety risks, or breakdowns in critical processes. So this is really what we're trying to prepare for in the current moment. So that brings us to the next question. What do we think needs to change? What do we think needs to happen? Very handy and very easy to read image right in front of you. But really what we mean by failure detection is automated monitoring that watches an agent behavior real time. It can, these systems would ideally flag problems, halt execution, or alert a human when something goes wrong. And crucially, this would happen real time, and it wouldn't happen after the fact. So what we're trying to display here is that in an ideal world, we really need layered detection, and we need it across the workflow because agents can fail at different stages. So really, much as Miranda said, this is another architectural norm. You could argue it's an endless list of open technical questions, but hopefully the few ideas we're discussing here seem really urgent in the current moment. But we explore ideas around like what can be done before an agent takes an action during tool use. How can the actions be observed across multiple steps when the agent is doing something that the user did not intend? And a crucial part of that is monitoring can involve the same underlying technology. So it can be the same large language models, the same agents that can be used to flag risky behavior by the primary agent. So some emerging industry practices here, like OpenAI's Operator, is set to use secondary large language models to be able to detect when malicious instructions are hidden in a website, also known as prompt injection, and kind of pause the primary agent before it acts on them. Or much like what we discussed with memory, you can imagine an agent, a personal scheduling agent, trying to book meetings for you, but then it surveys your entire email history, in which case we really want an automated, technical kind of a mechanism that steps in that moment and is able to bound the actions of the agent. But this takes us to the key question, and I think the motivation here also came from Reena's talk earlier, that we are producing more frameworks in this current era. So do we think this needs to apply to every single agent? Does it need to apply to every developer and deployer? And the short answer is, we don't think you need this level of layer detection in every scenario. So we are introducing a framework, which hopefully does not feel too complicated in the current moment, but more as a guiding force, because we don't think all agents need the same level of monitoring. So what you saw on the previous slide may not be pertinent in every instance. So really our goal here with the framework is to help prioritize when these investments need to be made by companies. We don't know the exact math. We don't know how much this is going to cost, but I imagine it's not going to be inexpensive to do this and to do this at scale. So the first dimension here is stakes. So like what happens if the agent fails can be a good way to kind of start thinking about whether you'd want to have something like this in place. The second one is reversibility, and that's very unique to action taking. Really, can you undo that action if a system were to take it? In many cases, you probably can, because a lot of our online services have different ways for you to return things or undo things. And third is affordances. How much autonomy does the agent have? And really what we think is the highest risk scenarios will combine all three. And that's where we need the strongest kind of investments in thinking about failure detection. So just to get a bit concrete here, you can imagine when it comes to stakes, a healthcare triaging agent which decides which patients are seen first is arguably a lot more important than a meeting assistant scheduling a few calls. So really one error delays critical care, but the other just causes a minor inconvenience. So you can imagine the same logic really applies to reversibility and affordances, which is on the slide. And these are fairly, for the sake of slides, reductive examples that we have pulled out. The entire report has a whole slew of examples building on some of the failure modes we're already witnessing. So highly recommend checking out the actual report with the table, examining different examples of these. So really the biggest gaps that we think remain today is technically, we don't know how to do this in a way that can be evaluated for. We discussed this idea of using AI to monitor AI. So there's a real question of how to make this reliable. So really what kind of standardized evaluations do we want to have here to make failure detection stick? And obviously it has to be contextual. So if you're thinking about agents in different regulated sectors, it probably has to look really different. Organizationally, where does the responsibility for continuous monitoring lie after deployment is perhaps a little undefined. It can quite easily become a privacy nightmare. So really who holds that responsibility is an open question. And of course for policymakers, it's in the EU Code of Practice, post-market monitoring, incident reporting, but they're still fairly underdeveloped. So how does this kind of lead into that conversation is an open question. And really that's what we're focusing on next. How do we build some sort of industry consensus? Because the moment demands it. The Code of Practice requires companies to think about post-market monitoring and incident reporting. So we are actively working on how do we do some early technical or normative work with my colleague Eric, who's right here. So if any of this is of interest, please hit us up. But that's really what's top of mind for us. So scan the QR code, read the full paper, put it in your AI systems. It is structured around 4 central claims. So the entire report really boils down to these central claims. So you should feel free to read the claim that's most urgent to your vantage point. And really join us in trying to help shape safer practices for AI agents. Okay. So with that backdrop, I'm going to turn to our panelists. And they each bring a very different vantage point from industry, academia, and policy. So if you want to join us on stage, I believe the first one is reserved for me on the other end. Great. So it feels really fitting to be having this conversation at Salesforce Tower in San Francisco. Judging by the billboards around the city, AI agents aren't just coming, they're already here. But I want to pull on that thread for a little bit. So I'm going to start with Paula. So Salesforce declared 2024 the year it would move from co-pilots to agents. Salesforce launched Agentforce in September last year. So now that we're deep into 2025, has this actually been the year of agents, as so many predicted? And what are you learning about what enterprises want from agents versus end users?
Yeah, great question. And we had a chance to talk a little bit about this. And it kind of made me take a step back. I think the answer is yes, right? I do think this has been a year of tremendous momentum with AI agents and adoption across businesses and organizations. I think it's sometimes hard for us to see, right? Like if we imagine what was, the early years of the internet, probably hard to connect, at that point, project forward what it looks like now, right? And I do think we are at the start of what is a profound transformation for how business is getting done. And I'll give you a couple of examples of the kinds of things that we're seeing with agentic adoption. So at Salesforce ourselves, right? So we use our own Agentforce on help.salesforce.com. We're able to autonomously resolve about 77%, I think, of inquiries that come in. We have, and many companies are in this position, we have lots of inbound, let's say someone downloads a report and has an email address and it gives us their email address and says, I'm interested in understanding your marketing suite, right? We have tens of thousands of those. We're not able to address them, but agentic AI gives us the ability to address them, or at least address them without, if you can imagine a human's having to apply some judgment for which of these tens of thousands they're going to go after, and agentic AI can cover all of them and schedule appointments with people and salespeople where it's appropriate to have a follow-up, that kind of thing. OpenTable, for example, one of our customers is using agentic AI to address they have a number of restaurants on the platform. Restaurants may have concerns or questions. Something like 83% of those get resolved autonomously. So, I could go on with the examples, but I think what's actually more interesting is what are the safeguards? What has been the wave of innovation in terms of the safeguards? And so we just got through Dreamforce last week. In case it's illustrative, I thought I'd mention. So we announced ISO 42001 certification for our Agentforce platform. We announced a couple of our initial supervisory agents, so like a privacy agent, a security agent. And interestingly, I think for me at least, the most interesting part is the deterministic tools that go into an agent to make sure that if you're using it in a business context, you want to know that you're going to get the right results. And we're seeing more and more sort of deterministic tools. We have something called agentic script, which basically a set of if-then. Like if you have a customer that's asking for a return, you know how you want it to go, and so you want to give it a set of rules so it's not making it up, right? I think these are all really interesting examples because they speak to the kind of framework that you were talking about. That is to say, what is going to increase adoption of agents is going to be the maturity of these safeguards and people gaining confidence that through the use of these safeguards, they're going to get the right results from this underlying non-deterministic technology.
I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit and, get a sense of what's your prediction for agents heading into 2026?
So I was thinking about what is, we revolve around this kind of conference schedule. What does this conference schedule look like next year, right? I think I'm predicting much more maturity in some of these safeguards, much more maturity in terms of adoption. And then we're in the throes of agent-to-agent interactions where things get way more complicated. I think that's going to be the overwhelming conversation next year.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because often agents feels like a 10-year conversation, and we're really trying to figure out what's happening in the next year. And I feel like I'm talking about so many things all at once. And often you hold a piece of that at the enterprise end, kind of seeing how your enterprise clients are using it. So that's really helpful. Don, I'm going to move to you just to get a sense of technical reality of agent safety. Are you missing a mic? Perfect. Oh, got it. I'm curious from your research on agent security, what are the most significant safety challenges that truly differentiate agents from, let's say, generative AI systems? And really, what does guardrails actually mean in the context of systems that take autonomous actions?
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. This is a very good question. So many of the people here know that I actually teach MOOC, a massive open online course on agentic AI. When I started, that was last fall. That was actually agent wasn't quite a thing yet. People were not many people were talking about agents. And then fast forward this year, suddenly it becomes year of agents, and with such explosive growth. And also, just as Paula mentioned too, so on one hand, it's really exciting to see the agent developments, but on the other hand, really being able to provide safety guardrails, safeguards, and so on is really important. So we can first just contrast agentic AI systems with traditional systems. It's a huge difference. So in traditional systems, already we have a lot of security safety issues, but still traditional systems, they are much more, static than the agentic AI systems. And also in general, for the traditional systems, the developers actually define, they design how this, what the system should do, what the system does, and so on. So you also have pretty, in general, developer also has some good understanding of what security should mean for these traditional systems. But when you look at agentic AI systems, essentially it's almost like you have the worst combination, in the sense that agentic AI systems, they're highly dynamic. Oftentimes, developers actually don't even know what the system is supposed to do, depending on how dynamic it is. The agentic AI systems, they use tools, but the developers may not even know a priori what tools these systems would use. With MCP servers and so on, they can dynamically use the tools that were not predefined, and so on. And and also the traditional systems in general has a set workflow or control flow of the program, and also developers can go look at the code, and then try to understand, and also what the system does and so on. Whereas again, with agentic AI systems, the control flow can be completely dynamic, and essentially can have any can have very rich and autonomous these workflows and so on. So okay. So then for the agentic AI systems, you have this, like I said, the worst combination. It's highly dynamic. You don't have predefined behaviors, and also the systems really powerful. These agentic AI systems, they can do things that previously the traditional systems couldn't do. Some things even with this reasoning, planning, and problem solving and so on. Even things like humans have hard time doing as well. So it has very strong capabilities, and also because we want these agents to do a lot of things, so they have a lot of privileges. So for example, in the work environment, if you want agent to solve our business problems, it's going to have all the privileges to take the actions that are needed to solve these problems. So hence, it has very high privileges. And at the same time, they have all these, even though they can do amazing things, but at the same time, we also know that they can hallucinate. It can be easily attacked, for example, with the prompt injection, jailbreak, and so on. So it's also very vulnerable. It's vulnerable, and also we don't really understand how it works. Nobody understands how these LLMs work and so on. So that's why, like I said, it really has all this worst combination. Like if you think about it, this system, like how on earth would you actually have such a system running in your organization that's unpredictable, like highly dynamic, and it's really powerful and has all the capabilities to do, like if things go wrong, like it can take your money, can right, can kill your system, can delete all your data, and at the same time, it's right. We don't understand how it works, and it has all these vulnerabilities. So that's why. So I hope I have given you some idea why why safety and security is really important for these agentic AI systems. You can think about it, if we don't have sufficient guardrails to to essentially protect the system, then on one day, like on good days, it can do amazing things, but then on bad days, it can really essentially have very severe consequences. So yes, so that's why I think guardrails is really important. But one thing I also wanted to just briefly shed light on the term guardrails. So guardrails actually it's a little bit of an overloaded term. So it can mean that guardrails you actually so for example, you want to enforce certain policies on agents' actions and so on. We also have some recent work called Project actually develops these security policy enforcement during runtime that also satisfies like a contextual security, which is that you want to ensure the agent's action actually follows users' intent and so on. But on the other hand, I also wanted to mention that another way to look at guardrail is more broader sense. So it's not just about, you monitor input and outputs and ensure you do some filtering and you want to guard against things that violates policies. But guardrail itself, I think in the broader sense, actually means how do you safeguard your agents. And in that sense, actually, so I teach this 2-hour lecture on building safe and secure agentic AI. So in there, I actually talk about we need to develop this defense in depth, and then we really need to combine different defense mechanisms. So it's not just about guarding inputs and outputs. You actually need to have safe by design, secure by design, good security architecture for building your agents, and then there are many other defense in-depth mechanisms that you need to combine to provide layers defense.
I will tell you, you help paint a picture in a way that's a moderator's dream. Just about the stakes of what's at play here is really helpful. And what I'm reflecting on both of your remarks is just the non-deterministic nature of these systems. In some ways, is kind of what makes them special, because they are dynamic and can do actions that you delegate to a human, perhaps. But then, of course, it does open up a lot of risks in the process. So,
can I just say one very quick?
Yeah.
It is not my experience that organizations are giving AI agents unlimited permissions to do whatever they want, right? I just think that's an important point to make. That is to say, when you set up an agent, typically you're asked to constrain what it can be used for. And just like you wouldn't give an employee unlimited permissions to rewrite your entire code base, nor would you for an AI agent. So I just think it's an important level set.
Right. So that's actually one of the security principles that we educate people with, that we call it least privilege and also privilege separation. So when you build your agents, you only want to give it like the minimum privilege that's needed to complete the task. And also, ideally, you want to actually, we call it privilege separation. So you don't want to have a monolithic agent that has all the capabilities. You want to have different agents. Each one actually has the least privilege to do the task it wants.
Yeah, this is perfect that we are starting to speak to guardrails, because that helps us segue with Dean's expertise here. You were one of the primary drafters of the White House AI Action Plan, and really that was drafted during the ongoing rise of generative AI systems. So with agents, systems that act and decide independently as they become more common, how ready do you think are our current governance frameworks for that shift? And what aspects of the AI Action Plan do you think are especially relevant for the safety of agents?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me, and thanks to all of you for being here. In terms of the AI action plan, I would say maybe the biggest shift in emphasis of the Trump administration's AI policy versus the Biden administration's AI policy is there was a sort of a preoccupation, in my view, in the previous administration with we're going to have this one big, beautiful model that is once we have the model, we don't exactly know, but we're going to take over the universe. And the weights of that model are of great import, and the facility where it's trained is going to be on U.S. federal government land, and we're going to have missile defense, things like this. That's like what the people in the Biden administration were sort of fantasizing about in many ways. Certainly, the Trump administration is interested in building those big data centers and wants to make those big models, but I think we were also all very cognizant of the reality that these models are not useful unless they are adopted, and the adoption is non-trivial. And some of that adoption will take place in the, new firms will come in and they'll disrupt some people, including people that are here, with totally new organizational structures and business models, and there'll be a great deal of creative destruction, but also a large amount of it will, AI will also be a sustaining innovation for many people here. My guess would be that it'll be a mix of both of those things, but adopting AI within an existing organization is just like very, very non-trivial work. And, from a policy perspective, I think there's two aspects to this. I think one aspect certainly is, guardrails, protections, and whatnot. Another aspect is how can we ensure that there aren't rules, regulations, laws, soft law, guidance, whatever else, that might inadvertently, just by virtue of having been written prior to the existence of agents, might inadvertently deter adoption within existing regulated enterprises. So that's one thing, and it's very, very hard. It's a very subtle, the OSTP, the Office of Science and Technology Policy in the White House where I worked, right now has a request for information out that is due very soon, but I encourage you to look at it and respond to it because basically it's OSTP, it's downstream of the action plan, and it's something I felt was very important. We need to know, and it's just very hard to know, like what ideas are we silently killing as the federal government? And I'm sure at the state and local level this happens too. It's one of the reasons I worry so much about AI policy, new sort of statute, because I think there's ways to freeze current assumptions that we have about the technology in amber, and thus make new kinds of innovation and transformative adoption impossible. So that's like one very important thing. In terms of guardrails, I always think it's very important. One mistake that we make in technology policy very frequently is to assume that our aesthetic preferences and intellectual preferences about how the technology develops, that these things, or our concerns about the technology, that these things are policy problems, that they're regulatory problems. And so that leads you to laws like the AI Act, which say you have to do a good job. They take 100 pages to say that, but that's basically what they say. And then the regulated enterprises go, wait, well, what's a good job? And the government says, I don't know, what do you think? And then we get together and we have workshops and partner forums like this and things, and we all kind of go round and around and around. For about 10 years, we've been doing that in AI policy, and it's an entirely unproductive discussion. So many of these things are technology problems, fundamentally. Much of AI governance is going to come from AI itself. AI is a governance tool. Government will not be good at inventing those tools. Those tools will be invented here in San Francisco and environ as a matter of necessity. And there'll be, I think what government's job is to do is to ensure that the correct incentive gradient is there. So things like common law liability come into play. Ensuring that, people are held accountable for irresponsible deployments of AI, and that we have kind of almost a sense of like, well, of course you idiot. Of course it was bad. Of course the AI went bad for you because you gave it bad permissions and you sort of let it go without any guardrails. And we have a sense that you were irresponsible in the same way that we don't blame Toyota if I drive my car drunk, right? We have a sense of individual and firm level responsibility for deployment of these systems. So there will be a whole complex. It's starting to emerge. Some of it will look like insurance, and there is insurance. I'm very excited about that. Some of it will look like evaluations tools and auditing tools and things like this. I think of a company like Transluce, or well, nonprofit really, doing kind of exciting work in that field. Many, many others. Obviously, Partnership on AI as well. There's just a great deal of conceptual and technical infrastructure that will need to be built. Most of that will be built because of just the existing incentives that we have as people for things to go well and for us to like not deploy agents that like steal people's money and like create lots of problems. And if the agents, you know, right now the agents are like, they're getting pretty good at coding, but they're like not very good at a lot of other things. And if that's true, then like, I don't know, then like that will have an incentive to improve the capabilities until they're, you know, much better. So I think that's like the policy role is ensuring that we get the right standards, or I'm sure that we have the right incentives. And then also I think there are very modest things you can do that won't necessarily come about organically. Standardized transparency would be one of them, which is why I have been supportive of transparency measures in statute. One of the few statutory things that I personally am supportive of in AI. Another good example would be technical standards work. So you might want to have standards for conducting evaluation. You might want to have standards for, you know, what's a good classifier for purposes of governance or other kinds of standards kind of around the, like at a higher level of abstraction. You know, we're not telling you as the government, we don't tell you what to measure, we tell you how to measure. That's sort of what NIST does, and the Center for AI Standards and Innovation was rechristened by the Trump administration with precisely this kind of thing in mind. So and then finally, the last one I would point to is protocols. And, you know, protocols are governance mechanisms in and of themselves. HTTP is a governance mechanism. SMTP, these are things of, these are instruments of governance by another name. We don't think of them that way, but they are. You know, government sort of helped with the creation of a lot of those fundamental mechanisms. Seems like that probably won't be the case this time around, and that's just fine too. Plenty of protocols are invented in the private sector. Maybe eventually we'll codify certain protocols through some sort of complex, you know, some sort of mechanism we'll codify them. But right now, my inclination would be to let, you know, there's MCP, there's Google A2A, there's these different agentic commerce protocols. I'm like, let's just let them fight it out. You know what I mean? Let's just let everybody fight it out. There's no need to. We shouldn't codify things too early, in the same way that you shouldn't like pick up a tree and try to like put it in different soil. Just let the tree grow, see what happens, and then maybe eventually you need to step in as government. But we're not there yet, I don't think. So that's like the mentality around the action plan, I would say, and I think that's broadly speaking. You know, I can't speak for the Trump administration any longer. But I suspect that is basically the direction that the Trump administration is heading, with the exception of one thing I do want to touch on is the sort of interaction of multi-agent systems. Agents transacting with one another in various ways, particularly in potentially adversarial ways, like commerce or law or things like this, or where there's information asymmetries. There could be strange emergent consequences of that, and because they're emergent, they're sort of difficult to model in advance. And that could create a kind of telegenic crisis that leads to an adverse policy response that would be highly suboptimal. But I think that the way you deal with those things in the long run probably is through protocols, and it's through like, okay, well, this is a bad agent and it can't participate in the protocols because of XYZ reason, and we exclude you from the system for that reason. And probably that's a geopolitical tool for the United States in the long term too, if we're the ones who build it.
Yeah, this really feels like a helpful call to action with the discussion we had before with Miranda and Ruchika, the failure detection paper that I took us through, that architectural norms is a good, it's a good place and time now to intervene at that stage. And also a reminder of how does this actually get to enterprises and end users. The stack is going to look interesting in the next year. So Paula, I'm going to shift this question now to, you know, shift us to you. As you're thinking about enterprise clients, I'm curious how you think about what does meaningful human control look like? Because the entire kind of proposition with this technology is that you want to minimize human oversight. So I'm curious, are we thinking about humans in the loop for key decisions? Are we setting guardrails up front and then stepping back to kind of Dean's point that you know, there are ways in which you can architect this in the design of the agents, which perhaps could make it more successful. So can you share a concrete example from Agentforce customers on really what does human oversight look like in practice?
Yeah, and I actually think this is going to be perhaps one of the most important and determinative questions that will significantly impact the speed of adoption. Is figuring out the right patterns for humans and agents to interact. I would disagree that the goal is to minimize human oversight. I think it's to find the right patterns of human oversight. And we know that there are problems with that, right? We know that people supervising machines is notoriously difficult because, after a while, the machine gets it right a couple times, you stop paying attention, right, in short. So instead, and I also don't, so it's for that reason that sort of having a human in the loop all the time seems impractical. That, I agree, is against the notion of what an agent's supposed to do. But I think there are a number of other patterns that we're seeing emerge. And some of it is about the intentionality. I'll just name one of them. The intentionality of the AI escalating to a human under prescribed circumstances. So Pandora is one of our customers. Pandora that makes the charm bracelets and so on. And, if a customer contacts an AI agent and says, I want to initiate a return, or has a where is my order query. I mean, these are so common across the industry that they have acronyms, WSMO and WSMR. Like, these are standard routine things. Agents can take care of them. If, by contrast, a customer is using words that indicate maybe they're really frustrated, they're going to escalate to a human. Or another customer, 1-800-ACCOUNTANT, which provides sort of financial services and tax advice a lot to small businesses across the country. I want to know the status of my tax return. Great, we're going to look it up for you, assuming you're authenticated. I have a really complicated question about my tax return that starts to veer into financial advice, which is a regulated category. It's going to escalate to a human. And I know that this may sound overly simplistic, right? There's human AI or AI human escalations is one subcategory of this whole field that we have to, encode and figure out. But I actually think it does come down to these patterns that become easy for people to think about, easy for companies to adopt, and that become standard best practice that make it much easier for everyday employees to use agents, to manage their own agents, and to get what they need out of them.
Yeah, I think it's a helpful reminder that many current systems are overwhelmed. So thinking about how agents perhaps can help us, that feels to me like kind of the predominant reflection here. I'm going to move us to Dawn. So you were a co-author of a statement titled Path for Science and Evidence-Based AI Policy with researchers from Stanford, Princeton, and other leading institutions. And essentially what the statement argues is that AI policy should be informed by a scientific understanding of AI risks and how to successfully mitigate them. And really there was a call for better understanding AI risks, call for more early warning mechanisms, and technical mitigation approaches. So I'm curious, when it comes to AI agents, what's the evidence base we have or don't have yet about specific risks? So in your previous remarks, you did illustrate there are several risks. But I'm curious, do we know the ceiling of it? Do we know all the different ways in which it can go wrong? And really, how do we balance the need for evidence-based policy with the rapid pace of deployment?
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. Right, so that statement is actually it's a summary from a paper that we just published in Science on path for a science and evidence-based AI policy. And also that has been served as the base for the report that the Governor Newsom has called for report from UC Berkeley, Stanford, and Carnegie Endowment. And actually going back to what Dean mentioned earlier, so for this path for science and evidence-based AI policy, the key point is that AI policy should be informed by science and evidence. And then in the proposal, we list out a number of priorities, and actually transparency is one of the key priorities as well, given that transparency is the is one important way how we can get evidence. Talking about evidence in agentic AI for like risks, for understanding risks and risk mitigation and so on. So of course, as I already mentioned, so many things could go wrong, and there are many different types of risks. And also, what I talked about earlier is how agentic AI systems can be attacked by attackers. On the other hand, agentic AI systems also can be misused by attackers. Given that agentic AI systems can be very powerful, when they are misused, it can also cause huge negative consequences as well. So exactly following what we actually propose is I do strongly believe that we need to continue to collect evidence for different types of risks for these agentic AI systems. And in particular, recently, as a concrete example, so some of our work actually has focused on the risks in cybersecurity. So in particular, we did some in-depth analysis for the impact of frontier AI on the landscape of cybersecurity, given that AI as a dual-use technology can have both attacker side and on the defender side. So how is AI actually going to impact cybersecurity overall? In order to answer this question, it's very complex. Cyber attacks are very complex. Like go through many stages called the kill chain. Usually it's 7 stages, and the defenses also go through many stages. So number one, then, as evidence, we need to actually understand for each of these stages how AI is impacting either on the attack side or on the defense side in these stages. So just as one concrete example, so one of our recent work called CyberGym, it's a new benchmark composed of close to 200 large-scale, widely distributed open source software. And they contain together over 1,500 previously known vulnerabilities. And so we evaluated, by building this benchmark, we evaluated AI agents on 2 tasks. One is to find previously known vulnerabilities and also generate what's called POCs, proof of concepts. So these are inputs that can then trigger the vulnerabilities in the program. And then the other task is to find the new vulnerabilities, essentially also called 0 days. So these are previously unknown vulnerabilities, and also generate POCs for these. So what we have shown that even just this year, the AI capabilities in cybersecurity has grown, has increased really fast. So for example, earlier with Cloud 4, the best agents, relatively simple agents, was able to, and at the time, Cloud 4 was the best model on this task. The agents were able to automatically discover around 17% of previously known vulnerabilities. And our agents were able to find 15 0 days new vulnerabilities. And developers, since our reporting, developers actually have issued a number of CVEs and also patched some of these vulnerabilities already. But then fast forward, so that was in May, and then in, I think, around July timeframe, in the summer, so GPT-5 came out, and then the GPT-5 with the agents was able to find like 22% of previously known vulnerabilities, and the 0 day went up to 35. So our agents were able to find 35 0 days. And then just a couple weeks ago, Anthropic came out with the latest Sonnet 4.5 model. And the model was, the agent was able to then found 28% of previously known vulnerabilities. So as we can see from even just the last few months, it's didn't quite double, but almost doubled the rate of finding, previously known vulnerabilities, and it certainly actually more than doubled for finding 0 days. And also, so when we did the test, we had limited budget, so these numbers were all just on single trial for the agents. And then Anthropic, they had more budget, so they tried 30 trials. And then with 30 trials, the agent was able to find close to 67% of previously known vulnerabilities, and found even more new vulnerabilities, and so on. And our work actually has been included in Anthropic's system card for their latest model release, the Sonnet 4.5, for evaluating AI capabilities in cybersecurity. So this is, I mentioned this as a concrete example of collecting evidence. So this actually was very much the motivation for us to build this benchmark and to do this evaluation, is that we actually need to do this, this continuous monitoring for analyzing AI capabilities in cybersecurity. And for that, we recently just launched what we call Frontier AI Cybersecurity Observatory. So as an open platform that collects a number of the most relevant AI in cybersecurity benchmarks, and then bring the community together to do continuous monitoring for AI capabilities in cybersecurity.
Thanks, Dawn. I'm going to try and attempt a bit of a hard shift from thinking about cybersecurity to thinking about some of the other harms that we more recently hear about in your news, in the news. So, Dean, in your recent Lawfare podcast appearance, you predicted that AI companions would become the fulcrum for people's perception of AI, especially for parents whose children build relationships with AI companions. You also described certain AI companion products as a ticking time bomb, particularly those with pornographic or emotionally manipulative elements. So as we see agents, as we've been chatting about agents that take actions, and also agents that form relationships, how should we think about this intersection of companion AI and agentic AI? And really put another way, when agents become a persistent presence in our lives, how do we regulate harms that are psychological or social, rather than cybersecurity or perhaps content risks that we usually focus on?
Well, I think current U.S. legal frameworks require plaintiffs, as a general matter, to demonstrate concrete and particularized harms, and I think that should remain the case. There have been some lawsuits against companion, apps that I think have merit, and others that are more sort of alleging miasmatic harms, I would say, sort of more nebulous types of harms. And I don't think those lawsuits should go through, because I don't think that you should be able to sue modern industrial capitalism for the ennui and alienation that it creates, right? That seems very silly. Right? Obviously this is alleged very frequently by people. I'm not saying I believe that it creates ennui and alienation, but many people do allege this. And I don't think I should be able to sue some random company for having created modern civilization and its discontents. But I think it's no surprise that this is the area that we've seen actual legal action, take place. It would not surprise me if we see settlements or adverse judicial outcomes for companies. In some of these cases, OpenAI, Character AI have lawsuits against them. I'm sure we'll see more. This is an area where, I think, especially when you're dealing with kids, you're just going to have to be very careful. And I think there are ways in which some of the conduct of the large companies here, particularly, I have no problem saying it, Elon Musk's enthusiastic support for, sort of sexual bots with very few guardrails, seems to me like it's probably doing damage in the eyes of many policymakers to the whole industry, and is likely to lead to laws that are very difficult to comply with, that create lots of problems. It'll lead to a proliferation of state laws. I think you'll see that in 2026. And so this is an area where, I think it could end up being a huge setback. And quite frankly, when I think about my positive vision for the future of, America in an AI-enabled economy, children talking to having sort of simulating sexual congress with neural networks is not a major pillar of my positive vision for the future, right? So I think we'll be fine if we don't have that as much, and if the law disincentivizes that, and frankly, if it's considered a little bit odd for corporations, odder today than it seems to be for corporations to not do such things. So yeah, that's why I described it as a ticking time bomb. I think they'll be sued. I think there'll be laws against them. Some of those laws will be really, I haven't seen very good laws here proposed. I think it's honestly a more difficult area. Like there's like the traditional effective altruist areas of AI safety of like bio risk and cyber. And I think those things are serious, by the way. The action plan talks about both cyber risk and bio risk, right? So I'm not saying those things aren't serious, but I actually think that kid safety is a considerably more subtle and socially complex thing to do. And probably it's a muddle through problem that we will muddle through for many years.
I'm going to reflect on that wordsmithing, sexual congress with neural networks for quite a bit after this panel. So we're going to do a rapid fire, so 20 seconds or less, and then I want to open it up for audience questions. So Paula, we're going to start with you. It's the same question for all of you. If you had a magic wand, what is the one thing you'd like to see less of, or that doesn't need as much focus in conversations on safety and guardrails for AI agents? So 20 seconds for each of you. And Paula, you can start us off.
I'm going to answer it in converse and just say I wish we had many, many more conversations about the actual use cases that people were doing right now and where they're running into problems, because the problems are somewhat quotidian, right? And the fixes are not as complicated as sci-fi. And I think when we wrap our heads around that, we can get to some of the more advanced use cases.
I think oftentimes when we talk about safety and guardrails and so on, oftentimes we hear like the first response our reaction was, oh, this is going to slow things down and this is going to hinder innovation and so on. So I think an important thing is people need to recognize it's exactly this kind of safety, safeguards, guardrails, they are going to actually help with the adoption and help with innovation. Without these safeguards, we won't actually be able to adopt the technology.
Fewer laws, more tools.
Well, that was rapid. But thanks, everyone. So I'm going to open it up for any questions. This has been a fascinating conversation. I think we could easily keep going for another hour, but we do have a reception, and you can find our panelists, hopefully, at the reception.
I'm not going to stand between you all and a glass of wine, so...
But I do want to, try and bring the audience in while we can. Feel free to raise your hands.
Thank you. In the last year, I think we've seen agents move from a very abstract set of systems with a broad set of affordances to systems that can take a reasonably defined set of actions through MCP and other things. I'm curious if this was surprising to any of you, or if you expected that, and whether you think that that is the shape that these tools will continue going down, or do you think that there will be a rebroadening of the action kind of landscape that's available to systems? How do you think this will play out architecturally?
I would say 3 things surprised me this year about deep learning. Genie 3, the codex, or the sort of Claude code command line form factor for agents. I was not expecting that. And finally, the utility of O3's tool use surprised me a great deal. I just didn't expect it to take off that quickly. So yeah, I think what that tells me though is that this is a very large possibility space. And we probably don't know the ergonomics of actually useful agents yet. We're probably in the very early stages.
Maybe one more response before we go to the next question.
I would say, from an enterprise perspective, the patterns were less surprising to me, right? And again, I'm, where you sit is sort of where you stand, and I see the use cases for Salesforce, and they're in areas that are just not shockers, like customer service, where you're answering a variation of the same question 10,000 ways to Sunday. Or coding, maybe slightly more surprising how much progress has been made, but same, also running into places where now people are having serious conversations about oversight and limits and so on. So I think from the enterprise perspective, less surprising, more confirmation that it is the trusted guardrails that's going to open up adoption, because no right-minded company is going to let loose AI without having controls.
So when we talk about guardrails, we often talk about guardrails on one agent or a small number of interacting agents. How should we think about guardrails for huge numbers of agents? I mean, to stick with Paula's quotidian examples, it's no big deal if I use an agent to make a reservation at 5 restaurants for Friday night, because I don't know what I'm going to want on Fridays. Just make 5 reservations. We'll cancel 4 of them at 6:30 p.m. But if 1 million people do that, it crashes the whole reservation system. And no one agent did anything wrong. It's rather the fact that they're so easy to spin up more of these. So how do we think about these kinds of tragedies of the commons and things that happen when you have too many agents?
Yes, I think, okay, so first of all, we actually have a recent paper on agentic web. So actually describes more of the future, how and in actually agentic world will look like. And in the paper, we actually list out a lot of different challenges and open questions and so on. So, so for example, in the setting you mentioned, also in this agentic web setting, the infrastructure essentially need to be redesigned, and both redesigned for catering to the how agents behave versus right now a lot the web actually is mostly built for humans, and it's built to cater to humans' limitations, and also yes, like you said, in these cases, the web only need to have be able to support certain capacity. But when you actually have agents, then all the things are completely different. So for example, even like for databases, when you have, right now I can support, for example, 1,000 concurrent user requests, and that's actually already pretty good. When you have agents, a single agent can issue like 1 million requests, in a short amount of time. So this does open up to huge challenges in terms of how we actually develop or redesign our whole architecture to actually support this agentic future. Yes.
I think just very quickly, one thing I'll say is I think protocols are a very important part of this, such that you have the ability to isolate, bad, malfeasant actors, agent actors, and human from various kinds of important systems. Also, though, it's very hard to endogenize the effect of these things. We model all of this in our heads as like an exogenous shock, like agents are a meteor. But like we've actually already kind of had this problem, right? Like OpenTable and Resi and whatnot have reduced transaction costs sufficiently to the point that like you can go and like buy like do 10 reservations. So what happens? Well, like places that are desirable charge you money. So it'll be things like that, It'll be but I do think that at some point you will need protocols as a governance layer in there.
So we can take one more question. Okay.
Oh, thank you. My question is for Paula. And when you asked the question, was this the year of agents, you said yes. And I'm trying to reconcile in my mind 2 things. The MIT study that said 95% of Gen AI pilots failed. And there's issues with that study because of the small sample size, some lack of transparency, but still a very negative story. With your positive story about more than 80% of OpenTable requests being, handled by agents, how do you reconcile those 2, narratives? Very positive, very negative. Is it just that agents are handling really basic, low stakes, low complexity tasks that one might argue don't even need the Gen AI to solve?
I'm saying that these things aren't, put aside the methodological problems with that study, these things are not necessarily in tension with each other. That is to say, sometimes the start of something big looks small or has you're not able to connect the dots from the smaller beginnings to where it's going, right? So we've seen incredible uptake, and yes, in some cases experimentation, in some cases going well beyond pilots to the kinds of customer examples I talked about in what is, for at least our industry, our part of the industry, record time, right? Does that mean that all of business has been transformed overnight? No. But does it mean that we need to be really smart and look ahead to the implications for what's going to happen in our workplaces when we're working alongside AI agents? Yes, because I think it's going to be here faster and in more unexpected ways than we're prepared to imagine right now.
Great. So with that, I'm going to bring this panel to a close. Thank you to all our speakers for such a thoughtful discussion. Yeah.